Paragraph 10. Modernity, of course, does not necessarily mean a rejection of all tradition, yet it does not imply a rational and deliberate re examination of tradition in terms of consistent and universal criteria, a process that can lead to the selective retention of those aspects of tradition that are conducive to progress in universal moral principles. Social and economic advancement depends on such an open and dynamic attitude towards truth and values, while blind traditionalism obstructs progress and creativity in any society. But religious traditionalism in the Middle East was very different from traditionalism as it was defined by Max Weber. For Weber, traditional authority was based more on the idea of habit than on deliberate evolution of tradition to the realm of the sacred. The kind of traditionalism Weber was concerned with is much easier to overcome because practice is based on mere force of habit, and on taken for granted institutions can easily crumble when confronted by the advantages of rational, deliberative, calculative, and purposive orientation. The traditionalism of the Middle East, like most religious traditionalism in general, was much more entrenched and resistant to change because the eternal validity of tradition was grounded in the eternal validity and truth of divine revelation itself. Islamic traditions and rituals, the realm of the religious laws, or Sharia, were defined as binding because they were the Word of God, and because it was assumed that the Word of God was not only eternally valid but unchanging. Traditions were perceived to be absolute and unalterable because they represented the eternal, unalterable will of God. In Islam, this traditionalism was based on belief in the finality of the Islamic revelation. After the Prophet Muhammad, there would be no further revelation and no change in the religious law. So strong was this traditionalism that it was even projected into the past. All the previous revealed holy scriptures, it was reasoned, must have associated the same laws and rituals as those found in the Quran, since divine truth is absolute and the divine will is eternal. This is paragraph 11, I think. The apparent inconsistency of the sacred texts and laws of Judaism and Christianity with those of the Quran was explained by the doctrine of corruption of the texts. The followers of the older religions were presumed to have altered their own holy texts, the holy books, for the sole purpose of refuting Islam. Sounds a little paranoid to me. 12. In Islam, the static thesis of finality, or the end of history, has remained the underlying force of a traditionalism that categorically rejects all that is modern and, for that reason, by definition, heretical. Has blocked socio-economic validity and creativity, and has exacerbated the social and economic problems of Muslim nations, but which also finds its own difficulties to be a further vindication of its hatred of the infidels. Even modernist Islam, while more progressive than militant traditionalism, remains imprisoned within the same set of traditional assumptions about the finality of the Islamic revelation and the eternal and changing nature of religious law, while modernist Islam is more flexible in adopting fundamental premise of traditionalistic model. The result for the world of Islam has been the cultural and spiritual deadlock described above, continuing social, political, and economic problems, and the pervasive negative perception and suspicion of the West and its institutions. The writings of the Bab offered a novel solution to Islam's cultural and spiritual impasse. The Bab's dynamic approach to truth questioned all forms of traditionalism. His transformative interpretation of the finality doctrine overturned a very foundation of Muslim tradition by explaining divine revelation, past, present, and future, as a continuous process that was cyclical and progressive. That's a very important one. His transformative interpretation of the finality doctrine overturned the very foundations of Muslim traditionalism by explaining divine revelation, past, present, and future, as a continuous process that was cyclical and progressive. What had been the basis of traditionalism became, in the Bab's own writings, the foundation of a thorough critique of the traditional orientation itself. Yeah, well.